Will I ever have you?
Welcome back to Two Hearts, where stories are weaved to explore the beauty of diverse cultures and the depths of human connection. Searching for closure in the dusty attic of her grandmother's Savannah home, anthropologist Kimberly Dean discovers a secret that shatters everything she thought she knew about her family. Mysterious letters reveal a passionate, forbidden love affair in the 1960s racially charged South, a love at a time that could have cost them everything. When the trail leads Kimberly to Dylan Forsyth, a powerful attorney with stormy gray eyes and secrets of his own, they uncover a conspiracy of family betrayal, stolen futures, and a love so powerful it transcended time itself. But someone wants the secret to remain buried, and they will stop at nothing to protect it. As the pair gets closer to the truth, they awaken a danger that has lurked in the shadows for 50 years and a connection that feels as inevitable as it is impossible. Ultimately, Kimberly and Dylan are forced to face the reality that some secrets refuse to stay buried and some loves are destined to burn across generations. Please enjoy the Forsyth letters. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so that more members of our community continue to find content like this.
The attic smelled of time itself, a dry, sweet perfume of decaying paper, cedar, and the ghost of her grandmother's lavender sachets. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light slicing through the grimy window, illuminating a chaos of forgotten lives. Kimberly Dean, anthropologist and professional excavator of the human story, felt a familiar thrill. This was her element, sifting through the remnants of the past to find the beating heart of a narrative. Her grandmother, Eleanor Dean, had been gone 6 months. The house, a stately Victorian in Savannah's historic district, felt hollow without her. Kimberly's ever-practical mother wanted to sell it, gut it, turned it into a sterile modern showpiece. Kimberly couldn't. Not yet. There were stories here. She'd taken a sabbatical from the university, telling herself it was for research, but it was really for this, a final conversation with the woman who had raised her. She was on her knees, prying open a brittle wooden trunk that had resisted her efforts for an hour. The lock finally gave way with a groan of protest. Inside, nestled in yellowed linen, was a stack of letters tied with a faded silk ribbon. The paper was expensive, heavy, and cream-colored. The ink was a deep indigo blue, the handwriting a bold, confident slant that hadn't faded with the decades. They weren't from her grandfather. Kimberly knew his spidery, anxious scrawl from the grocery lists and birthday cards her mother kept. This was someone else, someone who wrote with a poet's soul and a lover's fire. Her fingers trembled as she untied the ribbon. The first letter was dated June 14th, 1968. My dearest, unattainable Eleanor, another night has passed and the moon is a cruel witness to my longing. I saw you today across the square, your laughter like wind chimes in the thick Georgia heat. You were with him, of course, the picture of propriety, but when our eyes met, for that stolen, breathless second, I saw the truth. You are not his. You are not this city's. You are mine, in a way that defies the laws of men and time. I would burn this world to ash for a single hour in your arms. Yours in eternal defiance, Dylan. Kimberly's pulse quickened. Dylan? Who was Dylan? And her grandmother, Eleanor, her quiet, gentle, church-going grandmother who baked peach pies and tended her roses, was the recipient of this incendiary, forbidden passion? She sank back on her heels, the dust forgotten, the world outside the attic walls ceasing to exist. This wasn't just a story. It was a secret, a bomb. She read for hours, lost in the clandestine world of Dylan and Eleanor. Theirs was a love affair conducted in whispers, in glances across crowded rooms, in letters hidden in the hollow of an old oak tree in Forsyth Park. He was a white man. She was a Black woman. In 1968 Savannah, their love wasn't just forbidden, it was a death sentence. The letters were a masterclass in yearning, each word a caress, each sentence a desperate plea. The memory of your hand brushing mine today has branded me. I can still feel the heat of you, a dangerous promise that makes me ache with a need so profound it frightens me. I dream of a future where we can walk in the sun, where I can hold your hand for all to see, where the only color that matters is the color of our love. Until then, I exist in the shadows you cast. The final letter was dated October 30th, 1968. It was different. The handwriting was still his, but the fire was banked, replaced by a cold, sharp fear. My Eleanor, they know. Someone knows. I was warned today, a quiet word from a friend, a threat wrapped in a smile. We are being watched. We cannot meet at the tree. Not anymore. It is not safe. I have a plan, a way out, but you must trust me completely. I will send one last message, not with words, but with a sign. Watch for the Forsyth crest. When you see it, you will know what to do. Do not write back. Burn this. Destroy all evidence of us. Our lives depend on it. Forever. Dylan. And then, nothing. The trail went cold. There were no more letters. Her grandmother had never mentioned a Dylan. She'd married Kimberly's grandfather 2 years later, a quiet, solemn man who loved her, Kimberly knew, but who never seemed to touch the part of her soul these letters had revealed. What happened? What was the plan? What was the Forsyth crest? Kimberly's anthropological curiosity had curdled into a personal, burning obsession. This wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about the woman she thought she knew. She had to find out. The internet was a treasure trove. The Forsyth name was old money in Savannah, tied to business, law, and politics. A quick search brought up Forsyth and Associates, a prestigious law firm downtown. And there, listed as a senior partner, was a name that made her breath catch: Dylan Forsyth III. It couldn't be a coincidence. It was too perfect, too fated. Kimberly didn't think. She just acted. She showered, changed into a sharp black pantsuit that made her feel powerful, and drove downtown. The law firm was housed in a gleaming glass tower that looked alien against the city's historic backdrop. Inside, the air was cool and hushed, smelling of money and confidence. "I'm here to see Dylan Forsyth," she told the receptionist, her voice steadier than she felt. "Do you have an appointment, Miss Dean?" And no, but I believe he'll want to see me. It's a family matter. The receptionist gave her a skeptical look, but dialed a number. After a murmured conversation, she nodded. "Mr. Forsyth will see you. Third office on the left." The hallway was long and paneled in dark wood. Kimberly's heels clicked on the marble floor, a sound that seemed to echo her own frantic heartbeat. She knocked on the door marked D. Forsyth III. "Come in." The voice was deep, a low rumble that vibrated through the door. She opened it and stepped inside. He was standing by a window, looking out over the city. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his tailored shirt. His hair was dark, shot with distinguished silver at the temples, and when he turned, his eyes were the color of a stormy sea, a piercing, intelligent gray. He was handsome in a way that was almost aggressive, all sharp angles and a jawline that looked carved from granite. He was probably in his late 40s, but he carried himself with the potent energy of a much younger man. "Miss Dean, is it?" he said, his eyes appraising her with an intensity that was unnerving and strangely compelling. "Please, sit." He gestured to a leather chair opposite his massive mahogany desk. "You said this was a family matter." Kimberly clutched her briefcase on her lap like a shield. "It's about my grandmother, Eleanor Dean. She passed away recently." A shadow swept across his face. Not surprise, but something older and more complicated, as if her name had brushed against a place he kept meticulously sealed. Eleanor. He'd heard it before, never spoken plainly, always in warning tones, always as a mistake that nearly destroyed everything. My condolences. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you, but that's not why I'm here. Kimberly took a deep breath, diving into the deep end. I found something in her home, a home she shared with my grandfather for nearly 50 years. What did you find? He asked, brow raised and curiosity piqued. A series of letters written to her by a man named Dylan. The air in the room shifted. It grew heavy, charged. His gaze locked on hers, and for a moment, she felt like they were the only two people in the world. He moved from the window and sat behind his desk, the motion fluid and predatory. What did you say your name was again? He asked, his voice dangerously low. Kimberly Dean. He leaned forward, his forearms resting on the desk, the fabric of his shirt pulled taut over his biceps. Kimberly had to force herself to keep her eyes on his face. And you found these letters where? In a trunk in my grandmother's attic. They were hidden. She opened her briefcase and pulled out the stack, placing them on the polished wood between them. He signed them, Dylan. His eyes didn't leave hers as he reached out, his fingers brushing hers as he picked up the top letter. The touch was electric, a jolt that shot up her arm and settled low in her belly. She snatched her hand back as if burned. He scoured the first letter, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he didn't look at the others. He just looked at her. The storm in his gray eyes was churning now. "Why are you here, Miss Dean?" he asked, his voice a raw whisper. Because the last letter, it talks about a threat, a plan, the Forsyth crest. It sounds like something terrible happened. My grandmother never spoke of this. She clearly became a different person after that time. Quieter. I need to know what happened to him, to the Dylan who wrote these letters. He was silent for a long moment, his thumb tracing the edge of the paper. The silence in the office was a physical presence, thick and suffocating. That Dylan, he said finally, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name, was my grandfather, Dylan Forsyth Sr. Kimberly felt the air leave her lungs in a rush. She had been prepared to meet the original Dylan, the passionate young man from the letters. She had even been prepared to come face to face with the man's son, a link in the chain. But the grandson? It created a chasm of time, a whole generational story she knew nothing about. Her mind raced, trying to bridge the gap. "Your grandfather?" she repeated, the words feeling foreign and clumsy in her mouth. Yes, he leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning in protest. "I grew up knowing there was a woman he loved," he continued quietly. "No details, just enough to understand that her existence was considered dangerous." The predatory intensity in his posture softened, replaced by a profound weariness that seemed to settle into his bones. He died in 1978, 10 years after the last letter he wrote to your grandmother. The stark finality of the date landed like a stone in her gut. "How?" Kimberly asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The letters, they mentioned a threat. Was it because of her? Because of them?" Dylan ran a hand over his face, the gesture erasing the powerful lawyer and revealing a man burdened by a legacy he hadn't chosen. "It was a different time, Miss Dean, a different Savannah. My grandfather was a man ahead of his years in many ways, but he was still a product of his privilege. He thought his name, his family's money could shield him. He thought love was a force powerful enough to conquer hate. He was wrong." He stood and walked to a bar cart in the corner of the office, his movements slow, deliberate. "Whiskey?" he offered, holding up a crystal decanter. Kimberly shook her head, her throat too tight to even consider swallowing anything. He poured a glass for himself, the amber liquid splashing against the sides. He didn't drink it immediately, just held the glass, staring into it as if it held the answers. The threat wasn't just a whisper. It was from a faction within his own family. His older brother, Charles, and a few of his more virulent associates. They found out about Eleanor. The idea of him, a Forsyth, being involved with a black woman, it would have been a stain on their precious name, an unforgivable sin. He took a sip, his eyes closing briefly. They didn't confront him directly. That wasn't their way. They orchestrated things, made his business deals fall through, had him followed. They tried to ruin him financially, to break his spirit so he'd come to his senses. But my grandfather was stubborn. He was determined to find a way for them to be together. The plan, Kimberly remembered, the final letter, the Forsyth crest. He nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. The crest was a signal. It was the logo on the side of a shipping company he was secretly trying to buy, a small, failing freight line. His plan was to acquire it, change its name, and use it to help people, a way to build a new life, a new fortune, free from his family's toxic influence, a way to get them both out of Savannah, to somewhere they could just be. The crest appearing on a vessel in the harbor was meant to be the message. It's done. It's time. Go to the tree and I will meet you there with tickets. So what happened? Kimberly pressed, leaning forward in her seat, the story consuming her completely. Charles found out, Dylan said, his voice flat with the telling of it. He intercepted the final payment, sabotaged the acquisition. The company went bankrupt and my grandfather was left with nothing. No plan, no money, and a family that knew he was about to run for it. They cornered him, not with violence, but with something worse. They threatened Eleanor. They said if he ever tried to see her again, they would make her life a living hell. They'd ruin her family, get her father fired from his job, see to it that she was run out of town. They knew exactly where to strike to hurt him most. He set the glass down with a heavy thud. He broke. He loved her too much to let that happen to her, so he did the only thing he could think to do. He disappeared. He wrote her one last letter, not the one you have, a different one, a cruel one. It told her it was over, that he had been foolish, that he was choosing his family and his name. He wanted her to hate him. He thought if she hated him, she would be safe. Tears pricked at Kimberly's eyes. She could almost feel her grandmother's heartbreak, a phantom pain echoing across the decades. All that yearning, all that hope, extinguished by a lie born of love. And he just left? Kimberly asked, her voice barely a whisper. He left Savannah, drifted for a few years. He was never the same. The fire went out of him. He eventually settled in a small town in North Carolina, married a woman he met there, my grandmother, and tried to live a quiet life. He had my father, and then, well, he died of a heart attack. My father always suspected that he died of a broken heart that just took a decade to finally give out. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of the tragedy. It was a grand, epic love story, and it ended not with a bang, but with the slow, quiet death of a man's soul. Kimberly looked at Dylan Forsyth, the third, at the stormy gray eyes that she imagined were so like his grandfather's. She saw the echo of that pain in him, the legacy of a love that had shaped his family in secret. Why didn't she ever say anything? Kimberly asked, more to herself than to him. Because she believed him, Dylan said softly, his gaze filled with a compassion that seemed to span the years. She believed his last, cruel letter, and maybe, in her own way, she understood. She married your grandfather, a good man who adored her. She built a life, raised a family, but she never let anyone all the way in again. She kept that part of herself locked away, with the letters in that trunk. Some loves, even when they end, mark you forever. They become a part of your architecture. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, and the intensity returned to his gaze. You have her eyes, you know, not the color, but the light in them, the light that was described as a byproduct of joy in his letters. When you walked in here, for a second, I felt like I might have already known you. Described in his letters? Kimberly asked, picking up on the sudden revelation. I I came into possession of many of my grandfather's effects that my grandmother had no use for. They were given to me upon settling his meager estate after he died. The letters my grandmother wrote him? Kimberly's eyes widened with shock and hope. Pulling a keyring from his pocket, he unlocked one of his desk drawers and extracted an almost identical stack of correspondences to the one she had. Standing and walking around the large desk, Dylan stopped just in front of Kimberly. He was close enough that she could smell the scent of his cologne, a clean, spicy mix of sandalwood and bergamot that was intoxicatingly masculine. He held the letters out to her. "These belong with you," he said. "They belong with her story." As Kimberly reached to take them, his fingers lingered against hers for a fraction of a second too long. The same jolt as before, but this time it was warmer, more deliberate. It wasn't just a static shock of history, it was the spark of something new, something terrifying and thrilling. "I'm not sure I know what to do with these," she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. He had known about Eleanor long before Kimberly Dean walked into his office. Not the woman she really was, only the shape she left behind. A name spoken once and never repeated. A cautionary tale buried beneath expensive liquor and forced silence. His father had carried the knowledge like a bruise, tender and unexplained, and Charles had ensured it stayed that way. Love, Dylan had learned, was the family's most closely guarded liability. And now this woman, this granddaughter with her steady voice and unflinching eyes, had arrived with proof that the story he'd inherited was not only incomplete, but deliberately broken. The past was no longer something he could manage from a distance. It had finally claimed a seat across from him, demanding to be seen. "Nor do I," he admitted, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "But for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm not the only one carrying the weight." He looked from both sets of letters in her hand back to her face. "My grandfather loved her until his dying day. He never stopped. And now here you are, the granddaughter of the woman he couldn't have. It feels fated." The word hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. Fated. The past wasn't just a story she had uncovered. It was a living, breathing thing that had led her, inexorably, to this man in this room. The anthropologist in her was fascinated by the intricate web of coincidence and destiny. The woman in her was simply undone.
"Someone tried very hard to erase this story," Kimberly said, her voice regaining its strength as her analytical mind kicked in, a shield against the dizzying pull of his presence. "Your grandfather didn't just hide the letters, he burned his bridges. Your family, they buried the truth, and they don't like graves being disturbed," Dylan added, his expression hardening. He moved back to his desk, but the energy in the room remained charged, a current flowing between them. "My great-uncle Charles is still alive. He's in his 80s, but he's still the patriarch of that side of the family. He lives out at the old family estate, Magnolia Landing. If anyone knows the full, ugly truth, it's him. But he won't talk. He's a Forsyth. We don't air our dirty laundry." "Then we'll have to find the laundry ourselves," Kimberly said, a determined glint in her eye. "There has to be more. A paper trail. The shipping company he tried to buy for starters. What was its name?" "Southern Cross Shipping," Dylan replied, after pulling up the information on his computer. "Bankrupt. Assets liquidated. It's a dead end." "Everything's a dead end until you find the detour," Kimberly countered, leaning over his shoulder to look at the screen. The scent of her body oils, something light and decadent like vanilla, filled his senses. He found himself acutely aware of the warmth radiating from her body, the soft brush of her blazer against his arm. Bankruptcy means court records. Liquidation means asset lists. There are people to talk to, clerks, old sailors, anyone who was around in '68. It's a puzzle, Dylan, and we just found the first two pieces. He looked at her, at the fierce intelligence burning in her eyes, and felt a surge of something he hadn't in years, excitement. Not the thrill of a litigation, but the raw, vital pulse of a mystery. You're serious about this? My grandmother lived a half-life because of this secret. She deserved better. He deserved better. I'm not letting it go, with or without you. A slow smile spread across Dylan's face. It transformed him, softening the sharp edges and revealing a disarming charm. Oh, you're not doing it without me. This is my family's mess, and I've spent my entire life cleaning up their messes. It's about time I did it for a reason I actually believe in. He stood up. We start tomorrow. I'll clear my schedule. We'll go to the Chatham County Courthouse. We'll dig through every dusty file box they have. Their partnership was forged in that moment, an unspoken pact, sealed by shared purpose and a mutual, dangerous attraction. The next day, they were a surprisingly effective team. Dylan's name and firm's letterhead got them past bureaucratic red tape and into the bowels of the records department. Kimberly's sharp eyes and methodical mind found the patterns in the chaos. They spent hours in a windless basement room, surrounded by the smell of aging paper and binding glue. Here, she said, pulling a file from a metal shelf, Southern Cross Shipping, Final Liquidation Report, 1969. She laid it out on a long, scarred wooden table. They pored over it together, their heads close. The list of assets was bleak. One dilapidated freighter, a small office on the riverfront, and miscellaneous office equipment. Wait a minute, Dylan murmured, pointing a finger at a line item. What's this? One parcel of land, 1.2 acres, located on the Wilmington River, adjacent to property owned by the Forsyth estate. It was sold as part of the liquidation to pay creditors. Who bought it? Kimberly asked, her heart beginning to beat faster. Dylan scanned the page. It doesn't say, just lists a holding company, Title Holdings, LLC. That's it. Title Holdings. It sounds generic, a shell. But why would a bankrupt company own a piece of land, and why would your family's estate be adjacent to it? That's the question, Dylan said, his eyes dark with thought. Magnolia Landing has a private stretch of riverfront. It's been in the family for a century. I've never heard of any adjacent land being sold. That evening, they decided to take a drive. The tension between them had built all day, fueled by their shared discoveries and the constant electric proximity. Dylan drove his sleek black luxury sedan through the twisting, moss-dapped roads of the Isle of Hope. As they neared his family's estate, the atmosphere grew heavy. Magnolia Landing was a breathtaking antebellum mansion, all white columns and sweeping verandas, bathed in the orange glow of the setting sun. It was the picture of Southern aristocracy, and it made Kimberly's skin crawl. Let's see if we can find this land, Dylan said, turning down a smaller, unmarked road that ran parallel to the estate's high brick wall. The road ended in a gravel turnaround, overgrown with weeds. Beyond it, the land was dense with palmetto and oak trees. This must be it, Kimberly said, getting out of the car. The air was thick with the sound of cicadas. Dylan joined her, and they stood at the edge of the overgrown property. There's nothing here. Maybe not, he said, his face serious in the dim light. But my grandfather was a romantic. He believed in symbols. The Forsyth crest, the tree in Forsyth Park. He wouldn't just buy land. He would have done something with it, marked it. They began to walk into the thicket, pushing aside branches. It was slow, arduous work. The sun was setting fast, casting long, eerie shadows. I don't see anything, Kimberly said, frustration creeping into her voice. It's a wild goose chase. Perhaps, Dylan said softly. He stopped and looked at her, his face serious in the dim light. Or maybe we're just looking for the wrong thing. He reached out and gently brushed a stray leaf from her hair. His fingers lingered, tracing the line of her jaw. The simple gesture stole her breath. What are we looking for then? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he leaned in, inescapably, unapologetically, and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of sudden passion, but of profound, inevitable connection. It was slow and deep, a tasting of shared history and burgeoning desire. It was a kiss that said, "I see you, I know you, I understand you." When he pulled back, his gray eyes were burning. It unsettled him how familiar she felt, not because of desire alone, but because she was carrying a truth he'd lived beside his entire life without ever being allowed to name. "We're looking for a place a man in love would hide something for the woman he lost," he said, his voice husky. His words sparked an idea in Kimberly's mind, despite the racing of her heart. "A place visible of and from the estate," she breathed, "so he could be close but not seen. A place to watch over her." They turned their gaze not at the ground, but upward toward the river, and that's when they saw it. Almost completely obscured by overgrown vines was the skeletal remains of a small wooden structure, a gazebo, or what was left of one. They fought their way through the undergrowth to get to it. The wood was rotting, the roof collapsed in on itself, but the basic frame was still standing. Inside, in the very center, was a large flat stone serving as a floor. It was out of place, too perfect, too clean amidst the decay. Dylan knelt and ran his hands over the edges of the stone. "It's not mortared in," he said, looking up at her with a triumphant, weary grin. "Help me." Together, they managed to get their fingers under the edge and heave. With a groan of protest, the heavy stone slab lifted, revealing a dark, hollow space beneath. Kimberly's heart hammered against her ribs as Dylan reached in and pulled out a small metal lockbox. It was rusted at the edges, but otherwise intact. It was locked. Of course, it wouldn't be that easy. "We'll need a crowbar," Dylan said, his voice tight with anticipation. "No," Kimberly said, a sudden thought striking her. He wouldn't have wanted her to struggle. He would have wanted her to be able to open it. Think, Dylan. What would he have given her? A key? A clue? Dylan's eyes widened. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his same key ring. On it was an expensive-looking, ornate, old-fashioned key. "This is a replica of the original key to the main house at Magnolia Landing. My father gave it to me when I graduated law school. He said it belonged to his father. It's just a keepsake."
On a hunch, he tried the key in the lock, and surprisingly, it was a perfect fit. With a satisfying click, the lock tumbled open. Kimberly let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding as he lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, were not more letters, but a small collection of items. A tarnished silver locket, a folded, yellowed map of the Georgia coast, and a small, heavy key, dark and ornate, its head shaped like a stylized F. Dylan picked up the locket first. His fingers, usually so steady, trembled slightly as he worked the clasp. It opened with a faint creak. On one side was a miniature portrait of a young, vibrant Eleanor. Her smile was dazzling, her eyes full of a mischievous light that Kimberly had never seen in her grandmother's later years. She looked alive, fiercely in love, and utterly captivating. On the other side was a miniature of Dylan Forsyth Sr. He was handsome and bold, with the same stormy gray eyes as his grandson, but his expression held a reckless, hopeful fire that had been extinguished in the later photos Kimberly had seen. "He kept her with him," Dylan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Kimberly reached out and gently traced the face of the young Eleanor in the locket. "And she kept this," she said, her gaze falling on the lockbox. "She kept his last hope. She must have come here after he was gone, found this place. She knew." The realization struck them both simultaneously. Eleanor hadn't just passively accepted his cruel letter. She had investigated. She had found this place, this secret monument to their love. But why not take the contents? Why leave them here for 50 years? Because she was scared, Kimberly answered her own unspoken question. She found this, but by then, his family's threat was real. They were watching. Taking this would have been proof that she was still looking for him, that she hadn't let it go. So she left it, a secret she could visit but never possess. Dylan carefully closed the locket and picked up the folded map. He spread it out on the stone floor of the gazebo, using his phone's light to illuminate the brittle paper. It was a nautical chart, detailing the inlets and barrier islands south of Savannah. A series of hand-drawn circles and notes in the same indigo ink from the letters marked several locations. "What is this?" Kimberly asked, kneeling beside him. Their shoulders brushed, a point of warmth and contact in the cool evening air. "It's a route," Dylan said, his finger tracing a line that snaked through the waterways. From the Wilmington River, down the coast, all the way to a place called Blackbeard Island. He pointed to a circled spot near the island's northern tip. And here, he's written an anchor symbol and the word sanctuary. Sanctuary, Kimberly repeated. That was the plan. He was going to buy the boat, use the shipping company as a front, and they were going to sail away. This map, it's their escape route. But he never got the chance, Dylan murmured. He had to leave it here, a final breadcrumb just in case. Then Kimberly's eyes fell on the last item, the heavy, ornate key. She picked it up. It was cold and solid in her palm, a tangible piece of the past. And this? What does this open? Dylan shook his head, his brow furrowed in thought. I don't know. It's not a house key. It's too elaborate. Maybe a safe deposit box? A trunk? Their reverie was shattered by the sound, a sharp crack of a twig from the darkness behind them. It was loud, unmistakable. Not the sound of a small animal. It was the sound of a footstep. They both froze, their heads snapping up. Dylan immediately switched off his flashlight, plunging them into near darkness. The only light was the faint, ethereal glow of the rising moon through the trees. He moved instinctively, positioning himself slightly in front of Kimberly, his body a shield. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice low and commanding. Silence. The pulsing drone of the cicadas seemed to stop and hold their breaths. "Probably just a deer," Kimberly whispered, though her pounding heart was preparing her for anything but. "Deer don't snap twigs that loud," Dylan rumbled back, his eyes scanning the impenetrable blackness of the woods. He took her hand. "Come on, we're leaving, now." He pulled her gently but firmly toward the car, not taking his eyes off the tree line. They moved as quickly and quietly as they could, the lockbox clutched in Kimberly's other hand. Every crunch of a leaf, every rustle of the wind sounded like a threat. They reached the car and Dylan fumbled with the keys, his movements uncharacteristically clumsy. He shoved her into the passenger seat, slammed the door, and jumped into the driver's side, locking the doors just as they heard another sound, closer this time. The low, guttural engine starting up. Headlights flared to life in the distance, cutting through the darkness. A large, dark SUV, its high beams blinding, was parked on the road they had just come down. "Son of a," Dylan snarled, jamming the car into reverse and peeling out onto the gravel. He spun the car around, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "They're following us," Kimberly called, her voice tight with fear as she clutched the door handle. "Charles's men," Dylan said, his jaw set like stone. "Or what passes for them these days. He has old money and a long reach. He hires people who handle things. And now we have what they were looking for." The SUV was gaining on them, its powerful engine closing the distance. It was an intimidation tactic, a game of chicken on a dark, deserted road. "They're not going to hurt us," Dylan said, though his tone lacked conviction. "They just want the box." "And what if we don't give it to them?" Kimberly shot back. "Then we'll find out just how serious they are." He slammed on the brakes as they approached a sharp bend. The SUV, caught off guard, swerved, overshooting the turn. Dylan used the precious seconds to expertly navigate the turn, his knowledge of the roads giving them a slim advantage. He didn't slow down, taking the next turns on a wing and a prayer,
weaving through the maze of moss-draped lanes that led away from the estate and back towards the city. Finally, after several terrifying minutes, the headlights of the SUV were no longer visible in their rearview mirror. Dylan slowed down, his breathing ragged. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice raw, his eyes filled with a fierce protective fire. Kimberly nodded, her own heart still pounding. "But whoever that was is likely pissed. They didn't get the box." "No, they didn't," he said with a grim satisfaction. He reached over and took her hand, his grip strong and reassuring. "Well, this just got even more interesting, Kimberly. This isn't just about uncovering a sad love story anymore. This is dangerous. You can't go back to your grandmother's house. They'll be watching it."
"Then where do I go?" she asked, looking at their joined hands, at the lockbox on her lap, at the man who had gone from being a subject of her research to her partner, her protector, and the man she was rapidly and unreasonably falling for. He met her gaze, and in the dim light of the car's dashboard, she saw the answer in his eyes. "To my place," he said. "It's a high-security building. They can't get in there." "But I don't have any clothes or an overnight bag," she pointed out rationally. "My concierge can get whatever you need, but most importantly," he squeezed her hand, "we'll be safe, and we'll have time to figure out what that key opens, together." Dylan's penthouse apartment was a world away from the Gothic history of Savannah. It was a sleek, minimalist sanctuary of glass, steel, and polished concrete, perched high above the city on the top floor of a modern tower. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the glittering river and the web of gaslit streets below. It was a fortress in the sky, and for the first time since leaving the gazebo, Kimberly felt herself exhale. He led her inside, the door clicking shut with a heavy, final thud. "My security system is top of the line," he said, his voice still low and tense as he keyed a series of codes into a wall panel. "No one gets up here without my express permission. We're safe." He took the lockbox from her trembling hands and placed it on the large, slate-topped island in his kitchen. "Can I get you a drink? Water, wine, something stronger?" "Bourbon," she said, surprising herself. "Whatever you're having." He gave her a small, approving nod and poured 2 glasses of the same amber liquid he'd offered her in his office. He handed one to her, their fingers brushing again, the contact now a familiar, grounding spark. They clinked glasses, the sound sharp and definitive in the quiet space. "2 stubborn ghosts," he said, his gray eyes holding hers. "And to the living who won't let their stories die," she added, taking a sip. The burn of the fermented grain was welcome, a fire that chased away the lingering chill of fear. They stood in silence for a moment, the city lights twinkling below them like a distant galaxy. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a profound sense of connection and a shared, dangerous purpose. "So," Kimberly said, placing her glass on the counter and turning her attention to the box. "The key, the map, the locket, we have 3 pieces of a puzzle. We just need to figure out how they fit." Dylan nodded, his mind already working. "The map is the root, the locket is the heart of it, but the key, it's the practical element, the how." He picked up the ornate F-shaped key, turning it over in his palm. "It's too decorative for a safe deposit box and too old-fashioned for a modern safe. It feels personal, architectural." Kimberly's anthropologist brain kicked in, the fear momentarily receding in the face of a good mystery. Could it be a key to a building? A specific room? Maybe somewhere in the historic district? "Possibly," Dylan said. "But my grandfather wouldn't have made it that difficult for her. She wouldn't have had access to random buildings in 1968. It has to be something she could get to, something public, or something he could have gotten her a key to without raising suspicion." They fell into a comfortable, intense rhythm, spreading the map out on the island, examining the locket under the bright kitchen lights, and passing the key back and forth. The proximity was intoxicating. Every time their hands brushed, every time she caught his scent in the air, a current of awareness shot through her. This was madness. She was a Black woman, the granddaughter of the woman his family had destroyed, and she was falling for the grandson of the man who wrote those letters, the man who now stood beside her, a living embodiment of a tragic legacy. It was wrong, it was complicated, and it felt more right than anything had in years. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a small notation on the map, near the Wilmington River. It was written in the same indigo ink, but smaller, almost an afterthought. It says, "The Mermaid's Cry." Dylan leaned closer, his arm brushing against her. "The Mermaid's Cry," he said. "I've heard that name. It's an old tavern down by the docks, or it was. I think it's been closed for decades." A tavern, Kimberly mused. Public place. But why would he mark it? And what would the key open there? "I don't know," Dylan admitted. "But it's the only specific location on the map besides the route itself and the final destination. It has to mean something." He pulled out his phone and did a quick search. "You're right. Closed since 1980. The building is still there, though. It's owned by some historical preservation society. They've been trying to restore it for years." "Tomorrow," Kimberly said, her decision made. "We go there. We find out what the Mermaid's Cry has to do with all this." He looked at her, his expression a mixture of admiration and concern. "Kimberly, after tonight, are you sure? This is getting dangerous. Charles's men, they're not messing around." "I'm sure," she said, her voice firm. "Your grandfather and my grandmother risked everything for this story. The least I can do is face a few ghosts in a boarded-up tavern." She paused, her voice softening. "Besides, I'm not facing them alone." He didn't answer with words. He simply reached out, his fingers gently tilting her chin up, and they were kissing again. This time, it was different. It wasn't a kiss of discovery or connection. It was a kiss of possession, of promise, despite having just met a mere 24 hours prior. It was deeper, more demanding, his tongue tracing the seam of her lips, asking for entry. She opened to him, a soft sigh escaping her as his arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against his body. The world fell away. The city lights, the danger, the 50 years of tragedy as they touched and tasted. There was the savor of mint and bourbon on his tongue, the solid strength of his chest against hers, and the undeniable electric fact of their pulsating desire. When he finally pulled away, they were both breathing heavily. His gray eyes were dark, almost black with want. "You should stay here tonight," he said, his voice a low, rough murmur. "It's not safe for you either, or anywhere else." Kimberly's heart was racing, but her mind was clear. "Okay," she whispered. He led her down a short hallway to a guest's bedroom. It was as minimalist as the rest of the apartment, but comfortable, with a king-sized bed dressed in crisp white linens. He stood in the doorway, not crossing the threshold. "I'll be just down the hall if you need anything at all," he said, his gaze intense. "Thank you, Dylan," she said, her voice soft. He nodded, his eyes lingering on her for a moment longer, before he turned and walked away. Kimberly closed the door, leaning against it for a moment, her body still humming from his kiss. She was in over her head, in so many ways, but for the first time in a long time, she felt alive, truly, dangerously alive. Sleep was elusive. She tossed and turned, the events of the past 2 days replaying in her mind. The letters, Dylan's office, the terrifying chase, the kiss in the woods, the kiss in the kitchen. She finally gave up around 3 a.m., wrapping herself in a plush robe and padding out to the living room. The city was quiet below, a sleeping giant. Dylan was there, sitting on one of the low-slung leather couches, a glass of bourbon in his hand, staring out at the view. He'd changed into a soft gray t-shirt and pajama pants, and he looked less like a powerful lawyer and more like a man wrestling with ghosts.
"Couldn't sleep?" he asked, not turning around. "How did you know I was there?" she asked, coming to stand beside the couch. "I could feel you," he said simply, finally turning to look at her. His eyes were soft in the dim light. "Bad dreams?" "Old dreams," she corrected. "About a life half lived, about secrets kept too long." He nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. He patted the cushion beside him. "Come here." She sat, keeping a careful space between them. He didn't push, just took a sip of his drink. "When I discovered the history of my family's ugly legacy, I tried so hard to find my own way in the world sans the Forsyth name, but I ultimately came back to Savannah after my father died. I figured that buying a penthouse would literally and metaphorically keep me above the fray. But every night, I'd just sit in the dark and watch the city, wonder what it all meant. All the money, all the power. What was the point if it was built on a foundation of lies and cruelty? Is that why you became a lawyer? To fix it?" "I really thought so. I just became a better version of them, a cleaner, more sophisticated version. I negotiate mergers and acquisitions. I protect assets. I litigate lawsuits. I'm a glorified janitor, sweeping up the family dirt and keeping it out of public view." "That's not all you are," Kimberly said, her voice firm. "You're the man who helped me tonight, the man who's trying to right a 50-year-old wrong." "Because of you," he said, his gaze intense. "Before you walked into my office, I was just existing, going through the motions. You woke something up in me, Kimberly, something I thought was long dead." He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw, just as he had in the woods. But this time, there was no hesitation. When he leaned in, she met him halfway. Their joining was slow, deliberate, a conversation without words. It was a kiss of shared vulnerability and burgeoning trust. It wasn't about lust. It was about destiny, about finding a kindred spirit in the most unlikely of circumstances. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "This is complicated," he whispered. "Everything worth anything is," she whispered back. He stood up and held out a hand to her. "Come on," he said. "Let's try to get some rest. We have a date with a mermaid tomorrow." She let him lead her back to the guest room. At the door, he paused. "Good night, Kimberly." "Good night, Dylan." He leaned in and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her forehead, a promise. Then, he was gone. Kimberly closed the door and slid into the cool sheets, her body finally relaxing. For the first time all night, she felt safe, and she knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that it had everything to do with the man sleeping just down the hall. The next morning, the city was shrouded in a thick, ghostly fog, the kind that Savannah was famous for. It clung to the cobblestones and swirled around the wrought iron balconies, muffling sounds and blurring edges, until the historic district looked like a watercolor painting. Dylan was already up, dressed in dark jeans and a black Henley that hugged his broad shoulders in a way that made Kimberly's mouth go dry. He'd made coffee, the rich aroma filling the sleep kitchen. "Sleep well?" he asked, handing her a mug. "Surprisingly well," she admitted, taking a sip. "You?" "Better than I have in years," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Ready to go hunt a mermaid?" "After this coffee, absolutely." They drove downtown in his sedan, the fog swallowing the streets around them. The atmosphere between them was charged, a comfortable intimacy that had settled in overnight. They were partners now, in every sense of the word. The Mermaid's Cry was located in a dilapidated section of the riverfront, an area that had seen better days. The building itself was a 2-story brick structure, its windows boarded up, its faded sign barely legible. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, topped with barbed wire. "Well, this is cheerful," Kimberly said, eyeing the building with a mix of trepidation and excitement. "Charming, isn't it?" Dylan replied, pulling the car to a stop. "The Preservation Society's office is around back. Let's see if we can get someone to talk to us." The office was a small, cluttered trailer, staffed by a woman named Brenda who looked like she'd been fighting a losing battle with bureaucracy for decades. She was initially resistant to our request to go inside the tavern, citing insurance liabilities and safety concerns. But Dylan was a lawyer. He was smooth, persuasive, and when that didn't work, he was generous. A substantial donation to the Preservation Society, processed on his phone right there in the trailer, suddenly unlocked doors and waived all sorts of regulations. "Just be careful in there," Brenda said, handing Dylan a heavy ring of keys. "The floor in the upstairs storage room is a bit iffy, and watch out for raccoons. They've been nesting in the cellar." The air inside the Mermaid's Cry was thick with the smell of damp wood, stale beer, and decades of neglect. Dust covered every surface, and the only light came from their powerful flashlights cutting through the gloom. "It feels sad," Kimberly said, her voice echoing slightly in the empty space. "Like all the laughter got soaked up into the walls and never came out." "My grandfather was a sailor before settling into the family business. He loved places like this, places where stories were told." They explored the ground floor first, finding nothing but dust and decay. Then they headed upstairs. The floorboards groaned under their weight, protesting their intrusion. "Brenda said the storage room is at the end of the hall," Dylan said, leading the way. The room was small, cluttered with broken furniture and old crates. Dylan swept his flashlight beam across the space, and Kimberly's eyes caught on something in the back of the cramped closet. A small, ornate wooden cabinet, about the size of a bedside table, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. "Dylan," she said, pointing, "over there." He crossed the room and knelt beneath the cabinet. It was locked, but it had a small, decorative keyhole in the shape of a fleur-de-lis. He looked at Kimberly, his eyes questioning. She pulled the ornate F-shaped key from her pocket. It was a perfect fit.
With a soft click, the lock opened. Dylan pulled open the small door. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a small, leather-bound journal. Kimberly's heart was pounding. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. Dylan carefully lifted the journal out. It was old, the leather cracked with age. He opened it, and the familiar, bold, indigo handwriting filled the pages. "It's his," Dylan breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "My grandfather's." They sat on the floor, their flashlights propped up to illuminate the pages, and began to read. It wasn't a diary of daily events, but a chronicle of his love for Eleanor and his desperate plans to save them both. October 15th, 1968. The plan is set. Southern Cross is nearly mine. Charles suspects nothing. He thinks I'm just playing at being a businessman, too soft for the family trade. He has no idea that every deal I make, every dollar I earn is for her, for our future. I've bought the land by the river, the one with the view of Magnolia Landing. I'm building her a sanctuary there, a place where we can meet, where I can watch over her. I've hidden the key to our future in a place only she would understand, the Mermaid's Cry. It was our first real date, the first place we could talk, really talk, without fear of being seen. If anything happens to me, if I can't get to her, she'll know where to find our hope. October 28th, 1968. Charles is getting closer. He's asking questions about Southern Cross. I can see the suspicion in his eyes. He's a predator, and he smells weakness. But I'm not weak. I'm stronger than I've ever been because of her. I finalized the route, Blackbeard Island. It's remote, uninhabited most of the year,
The perfect place to start over. I've bought a small boat, a sloop I've named the Eleanor. It's waiting. All I need is the final payment, the shipping company, and the crest will go up, the signal, and then we'll be free. October 30th. It's over. Charles found out. He didn't just sabotage the deal, he threatened her. He told me he would ruin her family, that he would make her life a living hell. I saw it in his eyes. He would do it. He's not just a racist bastard. He's cruel. He enjoys wielding power to reap harm. I can't let her hurt. I can't. I have to send her away. I have to make her hate me. It's the only way to keep her safe. God, it hurts. It feels like I'm tearing my own heart out, but I would rather die 1,000 deaths than see one hair on her head harmed because of me. I love you, Eleanor, forever. Angry tears pooled in Kimberly's eyes as she read the final entry. She could feel his pain and sacrifice across the decades. It was a love story of epic proportions, and it had ended in tragedy. Dylan closed the journal, his own expression grim. He didn't just disappear, he was driven away by his own brother. And my grandmother, Kimberly whispered, wiping her eyes, she must have come here after he left. She must have found this journal and the key. She knew the truth. But she couldn't do anything about it, Dylan finished, not without risking her family. So she kept the secret and she waited. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the past settling around them. We should go, Dylan said finally, his voice strained. This place is giving me the creeps. As they stood up, Kimberly's flashlight beam swept across a dark corner of the room and she froze. Dylan, she said, her voice tight, look. Tucked away in the corner of the room, almost completely hidden by shadows, was a small metal safe built into the wall. It was old, but it looked sturdy. What the? Dylan murmured, crossing to it. He tried the handle. It was locked, of course. Do you think, Kimberly began, her mind racing. There's only one way to find out, Dylan said, reaching for the ornate F-shaped key. He tried it in the safe's lock. It didn't fit. No go, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. Wait, Kimberly said, her eyes falling on the journal still in his hand. He mentioned another key, the key to the lockbox I've buried in the gazebo. But we already found that key. Dylan's eyes widened as understanding dawned. The key to the safe. He must have left it here, in the journal. They began to carefully flip through the pages, looking for anything that might be a key, and then they found it. Tucked into the back cover was a small, flat brass key, almost invisible against the dark leather. Dylan pulled it out and tried it in the safe's lock. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click. He pulled open the heavy door. Inside, on a small shelf, were two things: a stack of documents tied with a faded ribbon and a small leather pouch. He picked up the documents first. They were legal papers, deeds, titles, and incorporation documents for a company called Sanctuary Holdings, and at the bottom of the stack was a deed to a small parcel of land on Blackbeard Island. He did it, Dylan breathed, his voice filled with awe. He bought the island, or a piece of it anyway. He set up a company, a trust for them. Everything was ready. Kimberly picked up the leather pouch. It was heavy. She opened it and poured the contents into her palm. It was a collection of gold coins, old Spanish doubloons, and a small fortune in vintage jewelry. He was going to fund their new life, she said, her voice trembling. He was a romantic, but he was also a pragmatist, Dylan said, a proud smile touching his lips. He planned for everything. They carefully packed up everything, the journal, the documents, the coins, and prepared to leave. But as Dylan was closing the safe, Kimberly noticed something else. Taped to the inside of the door was a small, yellowed envelope. She pulled it off. It was addressed to Eleanor in the same familiar handwriting. Dylan, she said, her voice barely a whisper, there's one more. He took the envelope from her, his hands trembling slightly. He opened it carefully and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a letter,
but it was different from the others. It wasn't passionate or pleading, it was a confession. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, then I have failed, and I am so, so sorry. I hope you can forgive me for the harsh letter I sent you. It was the only way I could think of to protect you. My brother, Charles, he is not a good man. He is cruel and vindictive, and he would destroy you to get to me. I couldn't let that happen. Please know that my love for you was and is the truest thing in my life. You are my heart, my soul, my everything. I have left you everything I can. The land on the island, the company, the money, it's all yours. Use it. Live a full life. Be happy. That is all I have ever wanted for you. And please, don't hate me forever. I am, and always will be, yours, Dylan.
Tears streamed down Kimberly's face as she read the letter. It was the truth at last, the full, unvarnished truth. Dylan folded the letter carefully, his own eyes glistening. He loved her so much, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He gave up everything for her. And she never knew, Kimberly whispered, her heart aching for the grandmother she was just now getting to know. She never knew the whole truth. They stood there for a long moment, the ghosts of the past swirling around them in the dusty, forgotten room. It was a profound, heartbreaking, and beautiful moment, the end of a 50-year-old mystery. "Let's go," Dylan said finally, his voice gentle. He took her hand. "We have what we came for." As they turned to leave, they heard a sound from downstairs, the heavy thud of the front door being forced open. Dylan muttered an expletive, his body tensing. "They found us." "Who?" Kimberly asked, her heart attempting to escape from her chest. "Charles's men. They must have followed us." They heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. They were trapped. "The window," Dylan said, pointing to a small, grimy window at the far end of the room. "It's our only way out." He crossed the room in 3 long strides and jimmied the window open. It was a tight squeeze, but they were both motivated. He helped Kimberly out first, then followed, dropping onto the fire escape below just as the door to the storage room burst open. "Go!" he yelled, taking her hand and pulling her down the rickety metal stairs. They scrambled down the fire escape, their hearts pounding, and dropped onto the damp cobblestones of the alley below. They didn't look back. They just ran. They ran through the fog-shrouded streets, the sound of pursuit echoing behind them. Dylan knew the city like the back of his hand, and he led them through a maze of narrow alleys and hidden courtyards, their pursuers always just a few steps behind. Finally, they ducked into a small, hidden garden tucked away between 2 historic buildings. They pressed themselves into the shadows, their breathing ragged, their hearts pounding in unison. They stood there for a long moment, the only sound their own desperate gasps for air. Dylan wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, his body a shield against the danger and the cold. "Look," Kimberly hissed, pointing in the direction they had just come. Turning to where she'd indicated, Dylan glanced up in time to see thick smoke billowing into the air. "Bastards! They're destroying evidence." He confirmed what they were both witnessing. "We could have been—" "It's okay, we're okay," he whispered, his lips brushing against her hairline. She nodded, her face buried in his chest. "You're right, but we can't let them get away with this." "I know," he said, his voice grim. "We need to end this. We need to confront Charles." "Confront him?" Kimberly pulled back, looking up at him in disbelief. "Dylan, he's dangerous. He just sanctioned his goons to burn down a building with us in it." "They definitely committed arson, but they saw that we were out of harm's way before they did it," Dylan corrected her. Kimberly glared at him. "Clearly, their pursuit was meant to scare us, but you're right, he's dangerous, and whether he realizes it or not, we have something he wants. The documents from the safe, the deed to Blackbeard Island, the company." "Exactly," Dylan said. "It's not just about a 50-year-old love story anymore. It's about a multi-million-dollar asset that Charles probably had no idea existed. We have leverage." "What are you going to do?" Kimberly asked, her eyes searching his. "I'm going to call him," Dylan said, his voice firm. "I'm going to tell him we have what he wants, and I'm going to tell him we're willing to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" "A deal that ends this, once and for all." They stood there for a long moment, the fog swirling around them, the city holding its breath. It was a crazy plan, a reckless plan, but it was the only plan they had. "Okay," Kimberly said, her voice steady. "Let's do it." Dylan pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a cold, imperious voice answered. Charles Forsyth. "Uncle Charles," Dylan said, his voice cool and calm. There was a long silence on the other end. "Dylan, what a surprise. I hear you've been poking around in business that does not concern you." "I'm the family attorney. All family business concerns me, and I found something very concerning, something I think you'll want to see." "Is that so?" Charles's voice was laced with condescension. "And what might that be?" "Proof," Dylan said simply. "Proof of what you did to my grandfather. Proof of the company he set up. Proof of the land on Blackbeard Island. All of it." Another long silence. When Charles spoke again, his voice was no longer condescending. It was cold, hard, and dangerous. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, boy." "Oh, I think I do," Dylan countered. "I'm dealing with a bitter old man who's been living a lie for 50 years, a man who destroyed his own brother's happiness out of vindictiveness and spite, a man who's about to be exposed." "You're reaching," Charles snarled. "Am I?" Dylan said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous murmur. "Then why did you send your goons to the mermaid's cry? Why did you try to trap us? You're scared, Uncle Charles, and you should be, because I have everything, and I'm not afraid to expose it."
"What do you want?" Charles asked, his voice tight with fury. "I want to meet," Dylan said. "Just you and me, and Kimberly Dean." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "The girl? What does she have to do with this?" "She's the granddaughter of the woman you ruined," Dylan said, his voice cold. "She has every right to be here. We'll meet at Magnolia Landing tomorrow at noon, and you will be there alone. If I see even one of your thugs, I reveal everything. I send copies to every newspaper in the state. I post it all online. Your precious name and social standing will be mud." "You wouldn't dare," Charles threatened. "Try me," Dylan said, his voice flat. "Noon tomorrow, Uncle Charles. Be there." He hung up before Charles could reply. He turned to Kimberly, his eyes dark with determination. "It's done." "You're sure about this?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he said, taking her hand. "It's time to finish this, for them and for us." The next day, the sun was bright and unforgiving, burning away the last of the fog. Magnolia Landing was even more imposing in the harsh light, a monument to a bygone era of privilege and power. Dylan and Kimberly drove up the long, winding driveway, the sedan's engine the only sound in the oppressive silence. He had called the police that morning, an anonymous tip about the destruction of a local landmark, potentially being tied to a disturbance at the estate. It was a precaution, a safety net he hoped they wouldn't need. Charles was waiting for them on the grand front porch. He was a tall, gaunt man in his 80s, his face a roadmap of bitterness and resentment. His eyes were a cold, pale blue, and they were fixed on Kimberly with undisguised contempt. "So," Charles sneered, his gaze flicking between them, "the wily nephew and that woman's progeny, I presume, displeased to meet you." "Cut the crap, Uncle Charles," Dylan said, his voice cold. "We're not here to trade insults. We're here to make a deal." "A deal?" laughed Charles, a dry, rasping sound. "You have nothing I want." "Don't I?"
Dylan said, pulling a folder from his jacket. "I have the original deed to Sanctuary Holdings. I have my grandfather's very detailed journal. I have the letter you wrote to him threatening Eleanor. I have everything." Charles's face paled, his composure finally cracking. Where did you get that? If your buffoons had spent more time exploring the mermaid instead of trying to burn it down, perhaps you would have found it. But none of that matters now. What matters is that I have it, and I'm willing to destroy it on one condition. "And what condition is that?" Charles asked, his eyes narrowed. "That you tell her the truth," Dylan said, gesturing to Kimberly. "That you tell her why you really did it, why you really hated my grandfather, why you really tried to destroy Eleanor." Charles stared at him, his pale blue eyes filled with a mixture of shock and fury. Then his gaze shifted to Kimberly, and a strange, twisted smile touched his lips. "You really want to know?" he asked, his voice a low, venomous hiss. "You really want to know why I did what I did? It wasn't because she was black. Oh, don't get me wrong, that was part of it, a convenient excuse. But that's not the real reason." He took a step toward her, his eyes burning with a mad, obsessive fire. "The real reason," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "is because I wanted her for myself." Kimberly gasped, a chill running down her spine. Dylan moved instinctively, putting himself slightly in front of her, but Charles ignored him. "I saw her first," Charles continued, his gaze fixed on Kimberly as if he were seeing Eleanor. "In the market, she was buying peaches. She laughed and the sun caught in her hair and I was gone, completely gone. I'd never seen anyone so beautiful, so alive. I approached her. I tried to talk to her. I was charming, powerful, a Forsyth. I thought she would be flattered. I thought she would fall at my feet." He laughed, a bitter, self-mocking sound. "But she didn't. She looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. She told me she wasn't interested. She told me to leave her alone." Me? A Forsyth? No one had ever told me no. No one had ever dared. His voice shook with rage and humiliation. And then I saw her with him, with Dylan, my brother, my little brother who I'd always looked down on, who I'd always considered weak. And she was looking at him the way I wanted her to look at me. She was smiling at him, touching his arm, and I knew she had chosen him over me. He turned his gaze to Dylan, his eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost palpable. He was glaring at his nephew, but it wasn't Dylan that he saw. It was never about her being black, not really. It was about her choosing you. It was about her rejecting me. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand that the one thing I truly wanted, the one person I truly desired, had chosen you. So I took her from you. I destroyed your happiness. I made her suffer, and I made you watch. It was the most satisfying thing I've ever done in my life. The confession hung in the air, a toxic, poisonous cloud. It was worse than Kimberly could have ever imagined. Not just racism, not just family politics, but a petty, wickedly obsessive jealousy that had festered for 50 years. "You're a monster," Dylan said, his voice shaking with a rage so deep it was almost terrifying. "Am I?" Charles sneered, coming back to himself. "Or am I just a man who wanted what he wanted, a man who was refused? Your grandfather was weak. He let her go. I would have never let her go. I would have kept her, whether she wanted it or not." That was it, the final, unforgivable line. Dylan lunged forward, his hands closing around Charles's throat. But Kimberly was faster. She grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Dylan, no!" she cried. "Don't! He's not worth it!" Dylan stopped, his chest heaving, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He stared at Charles, his gray eyes burning with a cold, deadly fire. "You're right," he said, his voice dangerously low. "He's not worth it." He turned his back on Charles, taking Kimberly's hand. "We're done here." "Where are you going?" Charles snarled. "Don't you dare turn your back to me." "Watch me," Dylan said, his voice firm. "And FYI, the police are on their way. I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear about the fire at the Mermaid's Cry, and I'm sure the press will be very interested to hear how tarnished the Forsyth family's golden son really is." "You wouldn't dare," Charles threatened. "I already did," Dylan said, his voice cold. "It's over, Uncle Charles. It's been over for 50 years. You just couldn't accept it." Amid his uncle's profanity-laced diatribe on the grand porch of his beautiful estate but decaying empire, Dylan led Kimberly down the circular driveway and back to the car. They drove away, leaving Magnolia Landing and its toxic legacy behind them for good. They didn't speak on the drive back to the city. They didn't need to. The truth was out, the ghosts were laid to rest, and they were free. Back in the safety of Dylan's penthouse, with the city spread out below them like a glittering carpet, they finally allowed themselves to breathe. "It's over," Kimberly said, her voice filled with a sense of wonder and relief. "It's over," Dylan agreed, pulling her into his arms. "We did it." They stood there for a long moment, just holding each other, the weight of the past finally lifting. "Now what?" Kimberly asked, looking up at him. "Now," he said, his voice soft, his gray eyes filled with a warmth she had never seen before. "We live." He lowered his head and kissed her. It was a kiss of celebration, of liberation, of a future finally unwritten. It was a kiss that tasted of hope and forgiveness and the promise of a new beginning. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I know I shouldn't say this, but I love you," he whispered. "I think I have from the moment you walked into my office, looking like a ghost and asking about a past I didn't know I had." Tears filled Kimberly's eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "I love you too," she whispered back. "I think I have from the moment we shared that first letter." He smiled, a true, genuine smile that reached his stormy gray eyes and transformed him into the most handsome man she had ever seen. "Then I guess it's fated," he said, echoing the word he had spoken what felt like a lifetime ago. "Fated," she agreed, her heart full. He led her to the bedroom, his hand in hers, the future stretching out before them, bright and beautiful and full of promise. The past was a story they had uncovered together, a tragedy they had righted together. But the future? The future was theirs to write, and it was going to be a love story for the ages.